Hello and welcome to this comparative overview of socio-juridical aspects of fox hunting and dogfighting. Here's an overview of the structure of this presentation. We'll take a quick look at the dynamics we're going to be considering, explore basic historical and social facts about fox hunting and then dogfighting, and then put these facts into perspective using three primary analytical lenses. First, an interpretation of fox hunting and dogfighting in the context of social class antagonisms, then the historical progression of societal acceptance of violence, and an analysis, finally, of different types of violence involved and what they mean sociologically. The scope of this presentation focuses on the UK and the USA. Socio-legal contexts vary, so focus is essential. The objective of this socio-juridical analysis is to better understand dynamics that underpin these practices to help conceive more holistic strategies against them, since blood sports are influenced by the ever-increasing social and legal stances against them, as Evans and Forsyth suggest. Here's a visual representation of the kinds of dynamics we're looking at today. Feel free to pause this slide if you want to examine it in more detail. So as you can tell, there are a lot of phenomena at play. So today we're mostly going to focus on class, race, and psychosocial values, as they seem particularly important with regards to fox hunting and dogfighting. A few brief words on fox hunting. Dogs bred and trained to hunt chase and kill foxes. They're followed by humans on horseback and sometimes a crowd of spectators. Fox hunting requires extensive resources and is therefore associated with the upper classes. So I've included here some notes on the historical account of fox hunting as ritual by James Howe. Feel free to pause any slide if you want to take a closer look at the evidence. In this case, Howe's claims are essentially that fox hunting serves as ritual dramatization of a stratified social order and also glorifies the upper class. Fox hunting is even thought to have played a part in maintaining consensus on the status quo of social relations in 19th century England, which some say contributed to the absence of a revolution. This map shows hunt countries as each hunt appropriates land using vocabulary that would usually be reserved to nation states, which evokes a claim to sovereignty. Here are also some examples of the esoteric jargon used in fox hunting instead of everyday words, compiled by Howe, and also some more of his findings that I've put together for you if that's something you'd like to take a closer look at. Fox hunting was banned in England and Wales in 2004 after hundreds of hours of debate, which some attribute to a loss of influence on the part of the upper class. However, fox hunting is still prevalent with numerous problematic exemptions that appear in the law and the evidence of use of deliberate smokescreen techniques to avoid prosecution and intimidation methods against its opponents. Dogfighting now consists in forcing dogs to fight, typically until one of the dogs dies or is removed from the fight. It involves breeding and training dogs, engineering them not to respond to pain. They're robbed of natural social behavior and their training is brutal too. Often surviving dogs are killed or die of their injuries. And dogfighting ranges from improvised street fights to international professional networks. Crucially, although the type of audiences varies, the spectacle itself is a crucial element of it. And due to the secrecy in which dogmen operate, it's very difficult to prosecute them. Dogfighting, from a historical perspective, is a form of baiting sport. Baiting sports have been around since ancient civilizations and used to be the dominant form of entertainment for all sections of society in the Middle Ages. At that point, baiting sports were a real institution and even under royal patronage, as you can see with these custom-built premises here. Aristocrats used to breed dogs for baiting sports, so they also had a financial stake in keeping dogs fighting each other or other animals after royal support for this type of practice waned in the 18th century. Dogfighting was banned in 1835, but gained popularity among the poor at that point as they wanted to hold on to their familiar entertainment. Because baiting sports, which had recently become illegal, baiting sports with larger animals such as bulls were harder to conceal than dogfighting, unfortunately. As far as the United States are concerned, dogfighting was imported, particularly into the Northeast and the South, by settlers and was therefore from the start closely associated with the practice and culture of slavery, which used dogs to ruthlessly police slaves and which was founded on what Kimberly Smith describes as the Celtic culture of honor. When bans first came into force, first in New York around the middle of the 19th century, dogfighting unfortunately moved underground. In the 20th century, pressure from animal advocacy groups and from social changes, such as the rise of new cultural influences in the South, led to the criminalization and marginalization of what were previously acceptable folkways. Dogfighting is still thought to be fairly common now, with Evans and Forsyth reporting a fight in Texas, Louisiana, or Mississippi every weekend, sadly. There is also evidence that dogfighting and racism are connected issues. In 2007, Michael Vick, a prominent black athlete, was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, among other penalties, for conducting dogfighting operations. He did conduct these operations, but it seems likely that, as Justin Marceau put it, this case was about race, not about justice. Firstly, obscure laws were used to prosecute Vick, and many have argued that his activities may not even have been discovered, if not because of a routine search of the kind known to disproportionately target Black people in America. Marceau makes an especially convincing argument when he points out that penning, a practice as cruel as dogfighting, which involves enclosing a fox or a coyote in a pen to be savaged by dogs, and which is overwhelmingly associated with white Americans, is very rarely punished. In fact, it's even legal in some states. Dogfighting, on the other hand, became a felony stateswide shortly after Vick's arrest, and since then, dogfighting investigations have arguably disproportionately targeted Black communities. I've included some notes here on Vick's circumstances and background, as reported by Marceau, if you're interested in thinking about this further. So we do need to consider the intricacies of racial representations and the control exerted by mostly white social groups who are in positions of power on the criminalization and enforcement practices of given forms of abuse, and wonder in what ways institutions, including the legal system and the media, shape our perception of various forms of animal abuse in relation to specific social actors, and whether they constrain or warp our intelligence of these problems and their potential solutions. A word now on cognitive dissonance with regards to fox hunting and dogfighting. The screenshot on the right here is from the website of an illustrator who focuses especially on creating commissioned illustrations for dogfighting kennels and dogmen. As you can see, his imagery glorifies dogfighting and shows dogs as borderline demonic-born fighters, while also on his website, he endearingly features his cats as part of his team, even though cats are often used as live bait to train fighting dogs. It's important to realize that cognitive biases can be at play in what may seem like pure evil behavior to outside onlookers, especially when a particular culture entrenches them into the minds of those exposed to it. In the UK, Harding notes a desire of an identification with the fighter dog as a lethal pariah. Similarly, this is especially apt since many status and fighting dogs were indeed banned by the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991. Harding also identifies US culture as very influential, especially hip-hop culture, which, quote, celebrates the otherness imposed by social and economic exclusion. Harding and Nurse, in another paper for the League Against Cruel Sports, identify 3 key levels of sophistication of dogfighting, from immature youths seeking to build a tough reputation through dogfights and social media, all the way to organized professionals who act purposefully to advance their social status in a private world at a high level and in secrecy. Further, crime correlation figures suggest a link between the ownership of dogs typically used in dogfighting and the perpetration of other crimes defined by a rejection of social institutions such as judicial process, the police, and private property. Dogfighting is also used as a rite of passage to desensitize young gang members to violence. A quick word on motivations and rationalization here. Hannah Gibson points out, based on work by Evans and Forsyth, that dogmen have several ways to rationalize their actions. Feel free to pause this video if you'd like to read this in more detail. Let's now explore some tools to interpret some of these social and legal and juridical aspects of dogfighting and fox hunting. The key theme here is that the desire to carry out and to signal transgression of social norms is a key motivation for dogmen and fox hunters alike. One possible outlook to compare some of the socio-juridical aspects of dogfighting and fox hunting is an analysis of class dynamics. In the UK, dogfighting, which has been associated with working classes for 2 centuries, was banned almost as soon as it fell out of aristocratic favour, whereas fox hunting was banned a whopping 169 years later. This arguably shows the ability of people with power to continuously redefine the acceptability of various socially constructed events and to marginalize those who engage in it, framing them as cruel and in need of discipline from the respectable orders of society. Another analytical tool that can be useful here comes from Norbert Elias. He argues that society has gradually shifted towards a distaste for violence over the centuries in what he calls the civilizing process. From a warrior's honor social code in the Middle Ages, we've come to marginalize not only the wielding of violence, but even displays of violence. As social norms began to claim to embrace civility in the 18th and 19th century, a growing mediation of violence took place, with animals increasingly used as proxy attackers, which we see in both fox hunting and dogfighting. Both practices came to prominence in that intermediary period and have now become symbols of a contestation of wider social norms. Note that this analysis would have looked very different if we'd carried it out a couple of centuries ago, precisely because the social meaning attached to these blood sports has changed so much because they have become so transgressive. Here's a concrete example of this sort of transgression. It's essentially the difference between being involved in an illegal blood sport and your garden variety status symbol, such as circling your neighborhood all day long in a luxury car. The luxury car says, I subscribe to society's mainstream ideals of success and I embody them. The system works for me. On the other hand, taking part in fox hunting or dogfighting says, this here is a practice condemned by forces trying to control my behavior. I will therefore practice them in order to reclaim my sovereignty over a social contract that does not give me the status I deserve. So relatedly, I'd like to move on to a typology of violence proposed by Dinesh Wadiwell and based on Walter Benjamin's work. My argument here is that dogfighting and fox hunting both entail both the types of violence comprised within the social contracts and associated with lawmaking and law enforcement, and the divine violence, as Benjamin calls it, which seeks to supersede it and operates sort of beyond or in reaction almost to the social contract. Feel free to pause the slide if you'd like to take a closer look. So continuing on this theme, this typology, just to clarify this a little bit, by signaling rejection of social legal norms, divine violence both declares to society a challenge to its norms and also signals to one's own community, I embody the ideal of power as defined by our culture, and also I am strong and unconstrained by oppressive rules trying to tell us how to live our lives within our own community. So watch me challenge society's norms. So just going back to this slide to summarize, dogfighting and fox hunting interact with lawmaking and law enforcing violence, and because they are transgressive, they also give the perpetrator the opportunity to claim sovereignty above and beyond the social contract. This typology of violence also puts into perspective the role of enforcement and non-enforcement as forms of administrative violence, both towards any social group, either particularly targeted, ignored, or treated leniently, and also towards animals that are either given or denied protection. Now, this analysis of political violence also has some implications, of course, in terms of the dominion exerted so brutally over animals involved in these practices. Feel free to take a closer look at these aspects if you wish to. I wish it was possible to cover all these aspects within the scope of this presentation, and I would particularly recommend reading Wadiwell's essay, which I've just referred to. So to summarize, fox hunting and dogfighting are both characterized by strong, complex social class dynamics and contribute to the construction of classes and the image of communities. We should bear in mind that similar psychosocial and cultural mechanisms come into play in these practices as they do in other forms of animal use, although they may seem unlikely to us as outside onlookers. And ultimately, these practices are both social and antisocial in nature, since they show assent to certain norms, community norms, while also transgressing societal norms and laws. To conclude, I'd like to invite you to reflect on whether law is at all adequate as a strategy against these practices, since unfortunately it is instrumentalized by these blood sports, rather like their victims are, and whether structural social inequality may be a driver of the desire to assert status and to contest the social order, whether to reject it or to reclaim control over it. There are numerous things you can do to help end fox hunting and dogfighting. So please consider supporting charities, non-profits working in this space, such as the League Against Cruel Sports, which acts against both of these practices, or Knockout Dogfighting in the US, which focuses, of course, on dogfighting from an educational perspective. There are plenty of opportunities to find out more about these issues as well. So please consider sharing posts by some of these charities on social media, or setting up a regular donation of any kind, any size, if you can. Those are easy ways to help. You can also consider reaching out to your local representative if there's any way that you or they might be able to put pressure on dealing with these issues in your local area. In the next couple of slides, you will see the references I've referred to throughout this presentation. I hope you'll be inspired to go and take a closer look at some aspects of it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy this presentation.